This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Last year I made a rather long review, well, most of my reviews are rather long, about this camera here, the Sony RX100 Mark VII, specifically focusing on whether it was the perfect vlogging camera. I really do recommend watching it because it covers all sorts of things about what you're looking for in a vlogging camera, not just about this camera. But to save you the time right now, the answer is no. Has a lot going for it, but it wasn't perfect. Very close, but not perfect. So Sony have brought out something which does address a number of the issues that I had with that camera for vlogging. I mean, after all, it is made for vlogging. So this is the ZV-1, which really is an RX100 for all intents and purposes. It's a more plasticky, lighter version with certain aspects of the previous cameras taken away and new things added, which are targeted at vloggers. Although this being at its heart an RX100 camera, it still has all of those terrific features from that line. Namely, the nice 1-inch sensor, the 4K 24, 25, 30p recording, the HD 50, 60p, or it does normal speed as well as the 100 and 120 frames per second, and the buffered high frame rate recording, which I'll get onto a bit later. Plus, of course, stills. This is also a very capable stills camera. I think this is the first time that Sony have introduced a proper flippy out screen and anything other than the handy cam. See, it turns on the camera as well for obviously our selfie vlogging. So that's number one. Although this camera here, the 7, does have a flippy up screen. And to be honest with you, I do prefer a flippy up screen. I'm being filmed right now on the Fuji X-T4, which has a flippy out screen. So normally I would have a monitor, but I'm using this because it's actually a really nice screen and the autofocus is pretty good. But I just can't help looking at myself, and that is the problem. It's not anything narcissistic, it's just you just keep getting distracted, making sure the framing is right, the audio is good, and your exposure is correct. But when you have a flippy up screen, you are looking much more towards the lens. The ZV-1 has the same amazing autofocus capabilities as the RX100 That is the incredible phase detection, eye tracking. It is incredibly accurate. In stills mode, you can do animals as well. It's amazing with my cats, it's always spot on. I spent a lot of time getting to understand the way that the Sony autofocus system works with various other cameras. And by default, the settings that this camera has in it, and also what they recommend, I do not recommend. What it has is the tracking set to responsive and the motor is set to fast, so the speed of the actual autofocus. If you're not moving, you can get yourself into a nice position like this and you can compose it well and make sure that your lighting is nice and even. But when you're walking, that light can keep changing. And the problem is if suddenly you get a brighter background than your face, that eye tracking can suddenly just turn off for a fraction. And because you've got things set to responsive and fast, it will instantly jump to that background. Whereas if you have slower settings, whilst that tracking will still turn off briefly, it won't be long enough for that autofocus to go onto the background, which makes the shot ugly and unusable. So I do really recommend your tracking set to standard and your speed set to normal. The improved stabilization is key, both for static and for walking. Vloggers always seem to be walking somewhere. The stabilization is most definitely better than the RX100 Mark VII. We have optical stabilization and we have added electronic stabilization, which does give us a slight crop on the image, but it definitely is worth it. So this is what it looks like when we have our stabilization completely turned off. So a bit jerky, I'm not walking too roughly, but you can see it's not very pleasant. So this is now standard stabilization, which I believe is just the optical bit, none of the added electronic stabilization. Certainly better than what we just had. Let's have a look at the active mode. Hopefully you can still hear me over the noise of the trees. This is stabilization set to active. So we have the optical part working, plus we have an additional electronic stabilization part turned on, which does give us that slight crop. This is with our stabilization set to off. So stabilization is set to off, so this is the widest we're going to get. This is standard stabilization mode, so there's no crop in this mode, as you can see. And now we go into active mode, you can see that it has cropped in over the previous two modes. Is it worth it? I think so. As long as you can hold your camera out far enough so it doesn't crop in too much on your face.
What we also have is gyroscopic data is recorded in this. The only other cameras I know that Sony have that do that, and I'm happy to be corrected, is the RX0 and the PXW FX9, the wonderful full frame camera that I have.
So let's see what happens when we use that gyroscopic data in Catalyst Browse.
Using Sony's free Catalyst Browse software, you simply load up your clip or clips that you want to stabilize and click Stabilize. You then can either have it as auto or use the manual slider to adjust how much you crop. Unlike most post-stabilization software, you cannot actually adjust the strength of that stabilization. That slider is simply for cropping. Once you've set how much cropping you want, you then export the clip, which isn't the quickest thing in the world, it isn't too bad.
So let's see what happens when we use that gyroscopic data in Catalyst Browse.
The difference with software like Warp Stabilize and this is Warp Stabilize doesn't have that gyroscopic data and just has to try and analyze to see how it needs stabilizing. But with this software, it has that data, so it knows what it needs to do to stabilize it and get the best results.
So let's see what happens when we use that gyroscopic data in Catalyst Browse.
But let's have a quick look and see what Warp Stabilize would do to this same clip.
So let's see what happens when we use.
As you can see, it doesn't work at all. I tried two different sets of settings, same thing. Because Catalyst Browse has that gyroscopic data, it is able to stabilize things really well, albeit sometimes at a substantial crop.
So this is what it looks like when we have our stabilization completely turned off.
Yep, it will even work really well when you have your stabilization set to off.
And steady shots off.
Ideally, I would love to have Catalyst Browse as a plugin to work in conjunction with the stabilization software of the edit programs. It would be a lot easier that way.
Not another camera review.
The thing is, the RX107 was the first time they put in a mic input, which was a huge, important thing that we've been asking for ages. But there was nowhere to actually put a microphone. You could get extendable arms. There's a couple of cages out there which are really good. I think this is the UU rig, and small rig do one as well, where you can put the microphone on the side here or here, so it doesn't get in the way of the flippy up screen. Now, the ZV-1 does have a proper MI shoe. It's not just a cold shoe, it's an MI shoe, multi-interface shoe, but it is on the top. And so this is where you're going to put your external microphone. So if it was a flippy up screen, it would get in the way, right? Hence the flippy out screen. Talking about microphones, there is one on top here. It isn't directional. It is designed to capture sound from close by. And you do have a Tina Turner wig to go on top of it, and that slots into the shoe. Whilst having an MI shoe in theory is really cool to have on this camera,
The reality is, apart from a couple of the lower end accessories, you're not really going to be using it that much. The really good accessories like the ECM B1M, which is the noise cancelling switchable polar pattern top mic, and the UWP wireless receivers with these SMAD adapters, they draw their power from the camera, and that power draw is too much for this little battery. So the reality is, you are mostly going to be using this MI shoe as a simple cold shoe. So for things like a Rode Video Micro, which is going to give you better audio than the top mic because it is more directional, and also things like the Rode wireless goes, which are fantastic. This is obviously the white one, which doesn't go so well on a black t-shirt. It's got the built-in lav mic, or you can plug in their own lav mic into it. And again, I would probably get the black version if you're going to wear black t-shirts, but if you're going to be wearing white, then yeah, the white's cool. Unless you just want it to stand out, maybe you do. The microphone itself has taken the place of the electronic flash that was in here, which I have never ever used, so I don't care. I think having a much better quality microphone, internal microphone, is much better than having a flash that I would never use. I've now got the Rode Video Micro plugged into the very welcome mic in of the camera. When you are switching between the two, please make sure that you adjust your audio levels, because these aren't auto levels. The level for the internal microphone needs to be set a lot higher than you have for your external microphone, whether it's a Rode Video Micro or the Rode Wireless Goes. Very good preamps, but very hot preamps of this camera. If you look at the meters, you'll see if it's going into the red all the time, you know that's not good. Bring it down. I currently have this Rode Video Micro set to I think level 14 or 15 on there, and when I have the internal mic, it's set to about 23 or 24. The RX105 had a built-in ND filter, which is incredibly useful for cutting down that light. They removed it from the Mark VI and the Mark VII, partly because of the new lens. Thankfully, it is in the ZV-1. It's a 3-stop ND filter. It's not going to be enough to get your shutter speed to double your frame rate, which is what you want for the smoothest motion, the right motion blur, and certainly in bright sunlight. At times you will, but it certainly does help having 3 stops of ND. Whilst there's no filter thread on the lens, if you want to put on additional variable ND, you absolutely can. You can get the official Sony accessory or third-party one, so it just adds a little sticky thing onto the front of the lens and gives you the ability to screw on an ND. I unfortunately don't have any new little sticky things for this camera, so I can't put it on, but it would be something like this. Now I just need to adjust my exposure. We have a much bigger and better record button, which is great because I never liked the little one on the side. Very fiddly to use. But one of the things which they've taken away from the RX100 line is the EVF. So that's gone. That's why there is space for an MI shoe now. I personally am very sad that that's gone, because I did use it quite a lot, because it's nice to actually shoot properly like this, you know. You've got contact with the body for stability. It is nice. I mean, they are assuming that most filming will be done vlogging style, you know. But I really do miss it, and also the fact that my eyesight's not as good as it was, and you can adjust the diopter on an EVF. You can't adjust diopter on an LCD screen. You just simply got to wear glasses. The ZV-1 doesn't have the top dial for the mode. Instead, it has a button for mode, so it's an on-screen selecting thing, so you just go through and select movie or whatever it is. So is that a big deal? No, not really. It's not exactly a big grip, but that is more than what we had on the previous RX100s, so you can grip it a lot better. But mind you, most vloggers are not going to be holding it this way. It's going to be on a GorillaPod selfie stick type device, but if you are holding it like this, then yeah, it does feel a little bit better. But one thing we have lost is the manual focus dial, which we could use for an aperture as well, depending on what. So that's completely gone. You can still use manual focus, but it is very, very, very fiddly. It's not a slider on the screen.
you have to keep turning the dial. So this is not a manual focus camera at all. Very simple but nice little feature is when you do hit record, you have a tally light here. May not be a big deal, but I mean, it was kind of more important when you couldn't see the screen to know when you are actually recording, because you've got no other way of knowing, but it's there. For continuous 4K recording, it does have that same, I think, 5-minute limit that the previous RX100 cameras have. Well, this isn't an RX100 camera, but you know what I'm saying. But you can get past that really easily simply by going into the menu and going to auto power off temperature. Set it to high and it'll just record for as long as you want. If you're plugged into a USB battery, for example, you can record for hours if you want to, depending on how big your card is, if you really, really need to. And using a USB battery to keep the camera going is something I use a lot on these cameras, because these batteries don't last a long time, and when you do have something screwed into the bottom here, because of the location of the quarter 20, you cannot access the battery compartment when you have something screwed in here, unless you've got a cage, because these sort of cages give you a nice bit of space here so you can still have something screwed in and access the battery. But on its own right, like this, the batteries don't last that long, and you will be unscrewing your grip on frequently to change it, unless you've got a USB battery and you can plug it in, which is something that I tend to do rather than having loads of batteries. Another thing we have is something called Product Showcase. This is a special autofocus mode that is designed for when you want to show off something, showcase? A product, something you're reviewing perhaps, to your audience. Stabilization will be turned off. So what we have right now is it is still tracking my face, but not with the eye tracking as far as I know. What happens is when something is put up in front of the lens, then that will take over and it doesn't have to cover the entire face, which is what you would normally do. See, look. My face is still in, but that is the priority as I take a slurp from this delicious drink. At which point you probably think that this video is sponsored by Robinsons, when in fact it isn't. It is in fact sponsored by Squarespace.
I've been using Squarespace for 5 years, both in this universe and the multiverse, which details everything you could possibly want to know about my vlogging. How to hire me for vlogging, how to watch my award-winning vlogs, and for my pioneering feline vlogs. Don't worry if you don't know code. I don't know code. It's so easy to use with fantastic templates. You can create your own website so easily. You can get 10% off your own website or domain, or both, via the description below. Now back to my universe.
So this is new here, the C1 shortcut button, and that little icon is called background defocus. Or to you and me, it is making the aperture wide open to get a shallower depth of field at the touch of a button. So let me demonstrate this mode for you. So this is f2.8 and I'm going to press the background defocus on it, and there we go, we have a slightly shallow depth of field. We'll press it again and it goes back to 2.8. Up to this point I've just been set to f1.8, but now I am officially in the background defocus mode. So if I press the button, we'll go to what's called clear, which is f2.8, and I will press it again and we are back to wide open. Now this is not a constant aperture lens, it's only at 1.8 when you are at the widest point. When you zoom in, you very quickly will go to f2.8. So let's have a look what f2.8 looks like with the background defocus mode on and off. I've zoomed in on the lens, so my maximum aperture is now f2.8. If I click the background defocus, it will look exactly the same because that is as wide open as you can get. If I click it again, we suddenly have a deeper depth of field. So what it's done is it switched it to roughly about f5.6. One slightly frustrating thing about the background defocus mode, if you have it engaged, certain settings will cancel out, for example, exposure compensation. So I have one of my shortcuts set to change my exposure compensation, and as soon as I do that, it says cancelled the switched background defocus state. But if you're at 1.8, manually at 1.8, then that won't affect it. I would like that to be addressed in future firmware. I don't see why it shouldn't be so easy to turn off. It should just stay on. It should stick on there until you press the button to turn it off. That's what I would like to see if you are going to use that mode. I know this feature is not designed for someone like me. It's designed for beginners who don't have the knowledge of f-stops and depth of field and that sort of thing. Personally, I would just stick with shooting just wide open and leave it at that. Dealing with any exposure changes can be a bit tricky with a camera this small, especially now you've lost the dial here, which you could have used for your aperture. The auto exposure is something which they are pushing with this. They have this new metering mode, which is facial metering, which is new. No other cameras have this. So literally, instead of like a wide metering or a spot metering, you know, center weighted, whatever it is, it will track your face. Everything I've shot so far has actually been in aperture priority mode with the face priority metering, and it's done a pretty good job. A nice balance between keeping my face exposed and the background not too overexposed. So this is aperture priority mode, and I have it set to -0.3. I'm in HLG2, by the way, and so with this face priority multi-metering, nicely flat lit, nice and easy. Let's see what happens when we move around, and you'll see how it slowly brings up the face. It's nothing too crazy fast, it's actually quite natural. So it's trying to get a nice even balance on it. And I think it does a fairly good job. I'm not really an auto exposure kind of guy, but certainly for this type of filming, this works very well. And I really must stop looking at myself, but my excuse is just trying to make sure that I'm properly exposed, all right? Just bringing it up. This is movie mode, face priority. You can see it's brought it up quite a lot. Let's try a different picture profile, see what happens. You'll see it come up a little bit more on my face, around about now. Yeah, there we go. And then into brighter light under the sun. You'll see what happens. It's over there somewhere. There we go. Yeah. Of course, if you're static like this, there is no real reason to be in an auto exposure, but it's only when you're walking around and the light is constantly changing. So just set it manually, and you know, if you've got an additional variable ND in the front, even better. This is Sony's Bluetooth grip slash tripod-y type thing. It doesn't come with it. It isn't essential, but it's got some nice things. You have a record button, of course. You have the C1 button, which is set for the background defocus right now. You have the ability to zoom in and out, but most likely you're going to stay on a wide because, you know, that's what you're vlogging with, but it is there. It's cool because you can spin it round, so you can have it whatever way you want. The only thing I don't like about the Bluetooth grip is it's not long enough, and there's no way of extending it because there's no quarter 20 underneath. So this is the distance, you know, if I'm holding it comfortably, it's like this, and I really am cutting off the top of my head. To get my head in fully, I do need to be fully extended, and even then that's a bit of a strain, and I need to make sure I keep looking at the screen, because otherwise I am going to keep cutting it off. Everything you've seen prior to this has been with this Manfrotto extendable selfie stick, so it gives me the ability to get into a field of view that is much more natural and a comfortable position for my arm. A lot of vloggers really like the big wide angle look. 16 to 35mm full frame equivalent, which is on here. This is a 10 to 24mm Fuji on the X-T4 at 10mm. You know, it's great because, you know, you can see people, cyclists and the river and the bridge without me having to pan off and show you. So this way you can keep me in the frame the whole time, which is way, way nicer, right? Mind you, I do feel this is a little bit too wide. Personally, this is really what I would prefer. This is a 20mm equivalent, which is basically what I've been trying to get with the ZV-1 today, using that selfie stick, which is much more natural. But there is a certain je ne sais quoi about this lovely wide angle. It is pretty cool. Just as long as you keep looking at me and don't look at those people, just look at me. Fine, I'm gonna go tighter. There, you're stuck with this now.
This is 250 frames per second 1080p in the high frame rate mode, displayed as HFR when switching modes. You can go even higher than this, 500 frames per second and 1000 frames per second, but there is a substantial quality drop. At 250 frames per second the results look really quite nice. Just an FYI, if you're in NTSC mode, you'll get 240, 480 and 960 frames per second. The camera uses a buffering system to achieve this. When you press record, you'll either capture the following 2 seconds of action when in start trigger mode, or the 2 seconds that just happened when in end trigger mode. This mode is great for when you don't have control of your subject and are waiting for the shot to happen. It then transfers that shot to the SD card, but it does take about 21 seconds to do that because it is creating a clip of about 21 seconds. Whilst it's doing this, you cannot record any other shots, you have to wait. Although if the shot isn't very good or something else is happening that's better, you can click cancel and it will save up to where it's got to. You can double that buffer length in the HFR menu, but at a substantial resolution drop, so I really don't recommend it. It may not seem like a lot, but you'll be surprised at what you can capture in such a short period of time. The RX 100 5, 6 and 7 are able to capture in this quality mode for about 4 seconds, but the ZV-1 has gone back to what the RX 104 was able to do, which is a shame. And if you want to record continuous slow motion, then you've got 50p, 60p, 100p and 120p, all in 1080p, and they look very nice. Definitely one of the key things that's going to make this appealing to vloggers is the price. I mean, £700 is still a lot of money, but it's way cheaper than the RX 107, which is still about £1,200.
With the things like the price, the better stabilization, the wider aperture, the ND filter, and arguably the flip it out screen, this is definitely a better vlogging camera than the RX 100 Mark VII. I just wish it had a headphone jack and a wider lens. I mean, yeah, I can hold it out further, which is what I'm doing right now, but I would still much prefer a wider lens.
Those two features would make this camera so good. It wouldn't make it just made for vlogging, it would make it almost perfect for vlogging. Because I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, there's no such thing as a perfect camera, because no matter what they give us, we'll always think there's something else that we want.
Hold on a minute, let's just jump back to the present, because it's so easy to get caught up in the things you wish it had that you forget just what a powerful beast this tiny little camera is. The incredible eye tracking autofocus and impressive stabilization alone are huge selling points. Combined with a flip out screen, superb image, 1-inch sensor, fast lens, built-in ND, high frame rates, and surprisingly excellent face metering for auto exposure. I never thought I would actually say the words auto exposure. Mind you, I said that about autofocus before, and now look at me. The ZV-1 is actually ridiculously good, especially at almost half the price of the RX 107. I will miss that EVF though.
You didn't really think I was going to end this video with a shot of a box, did you? Don't be ridiculous. Maybe I should have done a freeze frame.